Magneto. He is easily one of Marvel's most iconic and complex villains, but more than anything he is one of the most tragic figures in comic book history. He first appeared in X-Men 1 in 1963 as the primary antagonist of the X-Men. At first glance, Magneto might seem like just another power-hungry supervillain, bent on domination. But when you understand his past, you realize that Magneto is less a villain and more a man broken by the cruelty of the world, doing what he believes is necessary to protect his people, no matter the cost. Magneto's real name is Mac Eisenhart, though he is more commonly known by his alias, Eric Lanzire. His tragic story begins during World War II, when as a child he witnessed the absolute worst of humanity. Magneto is a Holocaust survivor, having been imprisoned in Auschwitz concentration camp, where he saw his family murdered and was forced to live through unimaginable horrors. These experiences shaped his worldview permanently. He learned that people will always fear and try to destroy what they don't understand. And from that moment on, Magneto vowed that he would never be powerless again. When his mutant powers of magnetism manifested, Magneto finally had the strength to fight back. But instead of using his abilities for peace, he decided that the only way to protect mutants from suffering the same fate as his family was through dominance. Magneto believes that humans will never accept mutants, and that the only way to ensure mutant survival is to conquer or eliminate anyone who stands in their way. His philosophy is built entirely on the trauma of his past. He is fighting a war he already lived through once, and he refuses to let it happen again. And what makes Magneto so tragic is that his goal isn't evil, it's protection. He fights for mutant kind, just as Professor X does. But while Xavier believes in peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans, Magneto has lost all faith in that dream. He doesn't believe peace is possible because history has taught him otherwise. In his eyes, every time mutants try to live peacefully, they're hunted, oppressed, and killed. To Magneto, his actions are justified, no matter how extreme, because he sees himself as the only one willing to do what's necessary, making him nearly impossible to reason with. When Magneto acts, it's not out of selfishness, it's because he genuinely believes the future of his people depends on it. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of Magneto's story is his relationship with Charles Xavier. They are old friends, once united by the same dream of helping mutants, and their philosophical divide has made them enemies. Yet their bond remains deeply respectful and mournful. They both want the same thing, but they just can't agree on how to get there. Magneto is the reminder that sometimes villains aren't born. They're created by tragedy. He is not evil for the sake of evil, like most one-dimensional villains. He's a man who has seen the absolute worst of humanity and vowed to never let it happen again. Galactus. When most people think of Galactus, they imagine an unstoppable, godlike being who consumes entire planets without remorse. Heck, his nickname is the Devourer of Worlds. But beyond the towering armor, immense power, and cosmic hunger, Galactus is actually one of Marvel's most tragic characters, a being who never wanted to become a monster, but was transformed into one by the universe itself. His story begins long before the Marvel Universe as we know it even existed. Before he became the Devourer of Worlds, he was Galen of Ta, a scientist from the last surviving civilization in the universe that existed before the current one. As his universe approached its heat death, Galen tried to save his people from extinction, but there was no hope. In his final moments, Galen merged with the sentience of the cosmos, and from the ashes of the old universe, he was reborn into the new one as Galactus, a being of nearly infinite power and hunger. But Galactus's hunger wasn't a choice, it was a curse. To survive, he must consume the life force of entire planets. Without doing so, he would die, and the balance of the universe itself would be thrown into chaos. In a tragic sense, Galactus doesn't want to destroy worlds out of malice or cruelty, he destroys them because he has to. In his eyes, he is simply part of the natural order. But to the civilizations he devours, he is nothing less than an unstoppable, apocalyptic force. Galactus remembers who he used to be, he knows he was once Galen, a man who sought to protect life, not end it. And that lingering awareness of his former self haunts him, but he cannot escape his destiny. Galactus is often accompanied by heralds, beings like the Silver Surfer, Firelord, and Cherax, who search the cosmos to find suitable worlds for him to feed on. Many of these heralds have tragic stories of their own, especially the Silver Surfer, who sacrificed his freedom to spare his own world, becoming Galactus' servant to save his people. And these relationships add another layer to Galactus' tragedy because, despite his role as a destroyer, Galactus occasionally shows mercy, understanding the pain his actions cause. And his destruction of worlds is said to serve a greater purpose in the balance of the universe, preventing overpopulation, controlling the spread of dangerous dangerous species and ensuring the long-term survival of existence itself. There have been moments in Marvel Comics when Galactus attempted to change his fate. In the Ultimates, for example, he was temporarily transformed into the Life-Bringer, reversing his hunger and becoming a force of creation instead of destruction. But even that state was fleeting, proving that no matter how much Galactus might wish to escape his role, the universe keeps pulling him back into the cycle of consumption and death. The Lizard is the result of a man trying to heal himself, only to lose his humanity in the process. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man 6 in 1963, Dr. Kurt Connors was a brilliant scientist and gifted surgeon who served in the military until he tragically lost his right arm during his service. Obsessed with the idea of regrowing his lost limb, Connors turned to reptiles for inspiration, fascinated by how lizards could regenerate their tails and limbs, and believing he could harness that same biological power, he developed a serum based on lizard DNA and tested it on himself, hoping to restore his arm. At first, the serum worked. Kurt's arm grew back, but the effects didn't stop there. The serum kept altering his DNA, transforming him into a massive, reptilian creature. In this form, Connors retained his scientific mind at first, but the more the lizard took control, the more he lost his humanity. Eventually, the lizard became a savage, uncontrollable force with one terrifying goal: to wipe out humanity and replace it with a new race of lizard people, believing it's the next step in evolution. What makes the lizard so tragic isn't just the monster, it's the man trapped inside. Kurt Connors is a good person and helped others with similar disabilities. He never intended to become a villain. The emotional core of the Lizard's story comes from Peter Parker's relationship with Kurt. Peter admires Connors as a mentor and a friend, often working with him on scientific projects. So whenever Kurt transforms into the Lizard, Spider-Man isn't just trying to stop a threat, he is desperately trying to save someone he cares about. Unlike villains like Green Goblin or Venom, Spider-Man doesn't want to hurt the Lizard, he wants to bring Kurt back. And the tragedy deepens because the cycle never really ends. No matter how many times Kurt finds a cure or regains control, something always pulls him back, whether it's the temptation to use the serum again, an accident that triggers his transformation, or the lizard personally re-emerging on its own. So Kurt Connors is forever locked in a battle between the man and the monster. Victor Von Doom, aka Dr. Doom. He's often viewed as the ultimate Marvel supervillain, a genius sorcerer scientist driven by his desire for power and dominance. But beneath the iconic metal mask and the iron rule of Latveria, Doom is a profoundly tragic character. He's not just a man seeking control, he's someone who truly believes he is the only one who can save the world. Born to a Romani family, in the small, impoverished nation of Latveria, Victor's mother, Cynthia Von Doom, was a sorceress who made a deal with Mephisto, and when the bargain went wrong, she was killed. And Victor's father later died trying to protect him from the ruling class. Orphaned and consumed by grief, Doom grew up obsessed with two things: mastering science and magic to save his mother's soul, and destroying anyone who dared to hurt him or his people. From the very beginning, Doom wasn't driven by greed. He was driven by loss and by a desire to correct the injustices that had stolen his family from him. As his genius blossomed, he was granted a scholarship to Empire State University, where he met Reed Richards, and it was there that Doom's pride sealed his fate. When Reed noticed a flaw in Doom's experiment designed to contact the dead, specifically his mother, Doom ignored him. The machine exploded, leaving Victor horribly scarred, and fueling his hatred for Reed. Victor blamed Richards for his failure and left the US, traveling the world until he discovered a hidden order of monks who helped him craft his new iconic armor and mask. From that moment, Dr. Doom was born, and he never looked back. In many ways, he could have been the world's greatest hero. His intelligence rivals anyone in the Marvel Universe, and his mastery of both science and sorcery makes him nearly unstoppable. He has built time machines, created world-altering technologies, cured diseases, and even wielded the power of gods, such as when he stole the power cosmic from Galactus or ruled over reality itself during Secret Wars. But no matter how much power Doom acquires, it is never enough. Because deep down, Victor Von Doom is still that wounded child trying to fix a broken world by ruling over it. In Doom's mind, the only way to save humanity is to control it completely. He genuinely believes that his rule would bring peace, stability, and order. And the terrifying part? In many stories, he is right. Under Doom's iron fist, Latveria thrives. His people are safe, well-fed, and free from crime. But they are also prisoners of his absolute authority. Doom's tragedy is that he doesn't know any other way to protect people except through domination. To him, freedom leads to chaos, and only his will can create a perfect world. Another heartbreaking aspect of Doctor Doom is his relationship with Reed Richards. Doom sees Reed as the living reminder of the man he could have been if he had chosen a different path. Doom's hatred for Reed is deeply personal, rooted not just in competition, but in the painful belief that Reed may, in fact, be smarter than him. And for Doom, who believes himself to be the most brilliant man alive, that possibility is unbearable. He is a man who started with noble intentions, and every evil act, every invasion, and every horrific invention comes from a place of wanting to create a world where no one suffers as he once did. But by trying to eliminate suffering through total control, Doom became the very tyrant he once despised. Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin. On the surface, Kingpin might seem like just another powerful, ruthless criminal, but underneath his empire of violence and corruption lies a man who clawed his way out of poverty, only to become trapped by his own ambition, paranoia, and loneliness. Wilson Fisk grew up in extreme poverty, bullied relentlessly because of his size and appearance, and the TV show Daredevil added another layer to his character. His father, an abusive drunk, constantly belittled him and beat him, instilling in young Wilson the idea that power was the only way to survive. After enduring years of humiliation and violence, Fisk eventually killed his own father to protect his mother, an act that marked his first step toward a life defined by control, dominance, and fear. From that moment on, Fisk vowed that no one would ever hurt him again, and that meant building himself into the most feared man in New York. Fisk worked his way up from nothing, manipulating gangs, politicians, and businessmen, until he became the kingpin of crime, controlling the city from the shadows. Fisk doesn't see himself as a villain. He believes his rule keeps the streets safer than the heroes ever could. Everything he does, whether it's murder, betrayal, or a backroom deal, in his mind is justified as part of his grand vision of control. But the more power he gains, the more paranoid and isolated he becomes. Fisk trusts no one, loves few, and fears losing everything he's built. That paranoia leads him to destroy even the people closest to him, either by pushing them away or using them as tools. But despite all his wealth, strength, and influence, Kingpin is ultimately a lonely man. His obsession with control leaves no room for true happiness. He is constantly rebuilding his empire because deep down he knows it's fragile. Everything he has can fall apart, and often does. Because let's be honest, no matter how strong you are, power built on fear is never truly stable. Kingpin's tragedy is that he could have been so much more. Wilson Fisk could have been a great man, a leader, a protector, maybe even a hero. But his past, his trauma, and his unshakable belief that the world only respects force turned him into a monster of his own making. The Winter Soldier. Before he was the cold-blooded assassin known around the world, he was Bucky Barnes, Captain America's best friend and loyal sidekick. But then his story became a haunting tale of a man stolen from his own life and transformed into a weapon. James Bucky Barnes was originally introduced during World War II as Steve Rogers' closest ally, fighting alongside Captain America as part of the fight against the Nazis and Hydra. But that all ended when, during a mission near the war's end, Bucky seemingly died in an explosion. For decades, Steve Rogers mourned him, believing his friend was lost forever. But Bucky didn't die. Instead, his barely alive body was recovered by the Soviets. They wiped his mind, outfitted him with a cybernetic arm, and turned him into the perfect assassin known as the Winter Soldier. For over 70 years, Bucky was kept in suspended animation, thawed out only when needed for high-profile missions. Each time he was brainwashed, sent to eliminate targets, and then frozen again, never given the chance to live, to question, or to heal. He became a ghost story. A whispered legend of a killer who could strike anywhere in the world, leaving no trace. The tragedy of the Winter Soldier is that he wasn't evil by choice. He was a victim, a prisoner inside his own mind, forced to commit unspeakable acts while the real Bucky Barnes was locked away, buried under years of programming and trauma. And what makes Bucky's story even more painful is his connection to Captain America. For Steve Rogers, discovering that the Winter Soldier was his best friend was devastating, but rather than give up on him, Steve fought to bring Bucky back, believing that the man he knew was still in there somewhere. And he was right. With help, Bucky eventually broke free from his programming, reclaiming his identity. But freedom didn't erase his past, it only made him painfully aware of it. When he finally broke free, he remembered everything, every mission, every person he killed, every time he was used like a tool. The guilt of those actions nearly destroyed him. He is constantly wrestling with the weights of his actions, even though they weren't truly his fault. And he doesn't see himself as a hero, even after fighting alongside the Avengers. To Bucky, being good isn't about titles. It's about quietly making up for the damage he was forced to cause. The Maker. a twisted version of Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe. While the main Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four is a hero known for his compassion and desire to protect the world, the Maker is what happens when that same genius mind is broken by loss, betrayal, and isolation. At his core, he isn't just about conquest or domination, he's a man whose trauma drove him to believe that the only way forward is through cold, absolute control, no matter the cost. There's a deep trauma rooted in his childhood, especially the abuse he suffered from his father. Reed Richards grew up as a prodigy, smarter than almost anyone on the planet, even as a child. But his intelligence didn't make his home life any better. His father was violent, cold, and dismissive, seeing Reed's brilliance as a threat rather than something to nurture. So instead of supporting his son's gifts, Reed's father constantly tore him down, and that abuse planted the seeds of Reed's detachment from humanity. For a time, Reed overcame that pain. In the early days of the Ultimate Universe, he found a family with the Fantastic Four. For the first time in his life, Reed was part of something meaningful, something bigger than himself. He loved Sue Storm, respected Ben Grimm, and felt purpose alongside his team. But all of that came crashing down after the Ultimate Universe spiraled into chaos. Reed felt rejected by his closest friends. His relationship with Sue collapsed, and the world he tried to save rejected him at every turn. Everything he had built was taken from him, and it convinced him that attachment is weakness. That's when Reed stopped being Reed anymore, and became the Maker. He abandoned the emotional side of himself entirely, focusing only on pure logic, pure advancement, and his own survival. He physically transformed his body, extending his mind and form, making himself nearly inhuman both mentally and physically. Gone was the Reed Richards who wanted to protect the world, and the Maker decided that the world wasn't worth protection, unless he rebuilt it in his own perfect image. All of the brilliance that made Reed Richards one of Marvel's greatest heroes is still there, but now it's focused entirely on experimentation without limits, multiversal domination, and bioengineering horrors. He doesn't conquer our rage or pride, he does it because in his mind it's simply the most logical solution. His relationship with the main Reed Richards of Earth 616 is especially chilling because the Maker sees him as a weaker version of himself. He looks at the hero Mr. Fantastic with his love for family and hope for peace and considers him naive. To the Maker, emotional attachments are liabilities, and saving people is a distraction from real progress. But beneath the villainy, he's still that same abused, lonely kid who was constantly belittled by his father. Only now, instead of trying to prove his worth to one man, he's trying to prove it to the entire multiverse. Gore the God Butcher. First appearing in Thor God of Thunder 2 in 2013, Gore is a perfect example of a villain whose story is driven by grief, betrayal, and the desperate need for justice, even if that justice comes through mass slaughter. He was born on a harsh, desolate planet where his people suffered endlessly. His entire life was defined by starvation, natural disasters, and death. From a young age, he was taught to worship gods, to pray for rain, food, and survival. But despite his prayers, no help ever came. One by one, Gore watched everyone he loved, his mother, his mates, and his children die in misery, including his last surviving child who died in his arms from hunger. After that, something inside Gore broke. He came to the only conclusion that made sense to him. The gods do exist, they just don't care. When Gore discovered that gods were real and had been present all along, standing above the universe while people like him suffered and died, his grief turned to rage. And fueled by that rage, he bonded with the All-Brak Necrosword, a living symbiotic weapon of pure darkness capable of creating constructs, enhancing strange, and corrupting its wielder. With it, Gore transformed from a broken man into a god-slaying force of nature. From that moment on, Gore made it his life's mission to rid the cosmos of every god one by one. Throughout Marvel's cosmic lore, there are countless gods who are selfish, cruel, or indifferent to the mortals who worship them. Gore's argument is simple. Why should gods exist if they do nothing but watch us suffer? Gore's campaign against the gods spans thousands of years. He slaughters entire pantheons across galaxies, leaving nothing but corpses and devastation behind. But even though his power grows, so does his emptiness. The more gods he kills, the more meaningless his quest becomes, because no matter how many gods fall, he cannot bring back what he lost. His grief is infinite, and no amount of revenge can fill the void left by his family's deaths. Gore eventually sets his sights on Thor, whom he fights across 3 different time periods: past, present, and future. Their battles are brutal and deeply personal, as Thor, who once lived as a carefree and arrogant god, is forced to confront the idea that gods do fail their worshippers. Gore challenges Thor, not just physically, but also philosophically. forcing him to reckon with the responsibilities of godhood and the consequences of divine neglect. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of Gor's story is that despite all his rage and power, he's still just a man who lost everything. His war on the gods is a way to give his suffering meaning, but deep down, he is still grieving the death of his child and the betrayal of hope. Even after nearly achieving his goal of eliminating all gods with the God Bomb, a device designed to wipe them out across all of time, his motivation remains rooted in the simple, devastating feeling that no one was there to save the people he loved. Gore is a tragic reflection of what happens when fate dies, and the pain left behind festers into vengeance. He represents the fear that the beings we trust to protect us might not care at all, and worse, that our suffering is meaningless to those with the power to stop it.